Week 3, Viva 3, on the Council of Jerusalem and the early church. So although many people believe that the church was just a body of believers, it was really a council. And this tells us that there was conflict between the Pauline and Jerusalem branches, that the God-fearers of Judaism were a major source of converts into Christianity, and the church was willing to make major theological decisions at councils. So first was that there was conflict between the Pauline and Jerusalem branches. And so you have to go back a little bit to see what caused this conflict. And so this conflict was the debate between whether or not Gentiles should be forced to follow the old Moses laws. They said, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And so that was one branch of people that were going around saying that they had meant Gentiles had to be circumcised, while another branch said that Gentiles did it because it went against the fact that Christianity is by faith, God, and grace alone. And so the council was held in order to figure out how to handle this debate. Peter, to talk about him a little bit, Peter had seen the Holy Spirit go into Gentiles the same way it does with Jews. And so then he believed that Gentiles shouldn't be held to such a strict standard that the Jewish people had failed to hold themselves. And so Peter was kind of in the middle. The two main people who were arguing were Paul and James. James being the head of the church and Paul being a recently converted Christian. And so James thought that, Paul. Paul thought that he should go and teach to the Gentiles about Christianity and that they shouldn't be circumcised, while James wanted to include Christianity more into Judaism, so believed that the Gentiles should be circumcised. And so we have two accounts of this council. One is written by Luke, and that is a much gentler way of talking about what happened at the council, because there was fighting, but in Luke's writing of the story, it was very calm, peaceful version of it, while Paul's was a very much more truer, less soft airbrush over story of what happened at the council. And so the council came to a middle and said that Paul would preach to the Gentiles and that James and everyone else would preach to Jewish people, and that the Gentiles would just have to follow the Noahidic laws, which were laws before Moses. So second, the God-fearer sect of Judaism became a major source of converts in Christianity. The God-fearers were a people group that believed in God, but weren't Jewish, but also fully didn't understand what this religion was. It was kind of a trend to them. They expressed enough interest in Judaism to attend synagogue and possibly give alms, but did not fully embrace the law. And so, like I said before about the Noahidic laws, that's what the God-fearers followed, because they didn't have the Moses' laws. And so, a little history of them. The God-fearers came from a polytheistic background, which actually gives some humor to the story, because Paul came and taught to them, and they believed he was talking about two gods, Jesus and resurrection, which he wasn't. So that is a little bit of humor. And so we don't really know what the God-fearers thought of the God of Israel, but we do know that they were passionate enough to come to the Jewish faith's defense. They were wealthy and gave money to the church, and they were among the first people of the church and were very involved in its growth, hosted many house churches, and provided shelter for missionaries traveling throughout the world. And like I said before, they followed the Noahic laws. So third, the church councils are the third point is that the church was willing to make major theological decisions at councils. The councils are formal meetings of church leaders and representatives from several churches who are brought together to regulate points of doctrine or discipline. And so, before Jesus died and ascended to heaven, he was the main person people would come to about theological issues, and he would fix them. But when Jesus died and went back to heaven, there was no one to do that. So instead of people breaking off from the church decided to hold councils so that they could fix the problems that were happening in the church. And so they would pray together, discuss differences, and work out a solution together instead of destroy the early church. And so that was a very wise thing that they did by keeping the church together and realizing that they needed to be kept together in order to survive. The church was one of the first democratic models, and the Christian churches still use it to this day. And I quote, "The Council of Jerusalem is the first political act in the history of Christianity." And even today, like I said in the first point about the debate about the Gentiles following the Moses' laws, the church still debates about it to this day. And so we are still trying to figure out what we should do in the world, and we're still having councils and holding the church together. So although many people believe that the church was just a body of believers, it was really a council, and it tells us information about the church and it tells us that there was conflict between the Pauline and Jerusalem branches, that the God-fearers were a sect of Judaism that became a major source to Christianity, a major source of converts to Christianity, and that the church was willing to make theological decisions at councils so that they wouldn't break the church apart. Thank you.